Welcome to Authors Night with the East Hampton Library. This event is generously sponsored by CIBC Private Wealth Management, the Hilaria and Alec Baldwin Foundation, Patty Kenner, Barbara and Steve Hyman, Michelle Tortorelli and Tom Kearns, and Janet C. Ross. We are pleased to present Alan Zweibel being interviewed by Susie Essman. Just want to let you all know at the end of this, so closer to 7, there will be a Q&A portion. So please type your questions in the Q&A window and we will get to those at the end. But otherwise, take it away, guys.
Alan.
There was
I'm going to correct Allison. That was beautiful, but I'm just going to correct. It's Zweibel, not Zweibel, but that's okay. So, Alan, we're here today.
I'm sorry, my accent. I don't know.
We're here today to talk about your book, Laugh Lines, which is my life helping funny people be funnier. Which is it's a memoir. Would you say it's a memoir, Alan?
Yeah, I'd say it's a memoir, but I call it a cultural memoir, given that I've been really lucky to have been a part of different eras in comedy, from the Catskill Mountains to the present, Curb and everything in between. So it's me during the changing culture of comedy over the last, I can't believe it. The book starts when I'm 21. It ends when I'm 71.
Yeah, which means that you have contributed a huge amount to the past. How many years is it? I can't do that math.
That's 50 years. And
50
at
years.
this point, my contribution is pretty much phlegm. Okay.
Why after 50 years did you want to write this book?
Well, it's interesting. That's a coincidence that it's a round number like that. I had been asked for many years if I would write a memoir talking about the different changes in comedy that I was fortunate to have been a part of. And I didn't want to do one of those books, and then I wrote this and then I wrote that. I needed an emotional sort of thrust to it. And when one of my writing partners, Gilda Radner, when she passed, I was, that took a real slow turn because she had cancer. And at the behest of my wife, Robin, I wrote a book about Gilda and myself called Bunny Bunny, and became a play and all of that. And the writer was satisfied in terms of that closure with that. What happened was about 3.5 years ago, Garry Shandling, when we did a show together, and afterwards we weren't
had a
talking.
falling out. Yeah, you had a falling out.
We had a big falling out after 72 shows over 3 years, and we weren't speaking. And we came back east that particular summer after the show ended, and Robin saw in the newspaper that Garry was appearing in Atlantic City.
Robin being your wife.
My wife, Robin.
Of how many years? 40?
Well, this November is 42. So
42?
for those of you,
Okay.
those of you who bet the under, you lost. Okay. And she saw that she was, what of the hotel he was appearing at. She called him there and said, "Listen, I'm bringing Alan down. I'm putting you in a room, and you're not coming out until you're friends again because you've been through too much." Okay. And that's what happened. And we broke the ice. And over the next few years, we got to be closer again, but we didn't have to be on the same set or in the same offices every day. So I was pursuant of him, and I wanted him in my life. There was something about him spiritually, as crazy as he was at times, that I needed him there. And we were getting closer and closer and closer. And about 3.5 years ago, I was out in California working on a script for a movie that I have out now that I co-wrote with Billy Crystal called Here Today. I called Garry. I wanted to have dinner. We tried to get it together because we were this close to being what we were.
Yeah.
And dinner didn't happen. So I had to come home. And he said, "Okay, why don't you call me Thursday?" And so we made a time to call Thursday night of the coming week. He died Thursday morning.
Yeah.
And I felt that I needed that closure. I needed to revisit Garry again, to do what I had done with Gilda. So I felt I had an emotionality that I can have in the book. So obviously the book still talks about Gilda and everybody else I've collaborated with and all the fun, but there's a chapter and a half devoted to Garry because I needed that emotionality.
It's interesting. We've been doing this now for 5 minutes, and within the first 5 minutes, you've mentioned, I would say, your three greatest collaborations, which are Gilda, Garry, and Billy.
Well,
and Robin, four.
Yeah, we collaborated on 3 kids.
Yeah.
I can't. Would you say that we collaborated on the 5 grandkids? That probably
That
doesn't work.
But I because I think that's one of the keys. But well, thinking about you, I mean, and reading the book and how you started and where you went to and where you came from and how important collaboration is to you. But what's interesting to me about you is that you are a writer. First and foremost, you're a writer. Whether you're collaborating, whether you're writing a kid's book, whether you're writing a novel, whether you're writing a play, whether, whatever it is, writers write. And that's the essence of who you are, I think, knowing you as well as I do. Would you agree with that?
Oh, God, yeah. I think that there's something in the DNA, even as a kid. When I was 12 and 13 years old, when Alan Sherman had those records out, I started writing my own songs.
Yeah.
What's that?
My Son, the Folk Singer.
My son, the folk singer. Okay. And then when it was in high school, I started writing little sketches. I failed poetry class because you're supposed to write poems, but that's what I did. So I do think that, and it's probably old school thinking, Susie, that I firmly believe that writers are born. You can hone your craft, obviously, with experience and with time and whatever. But I do believe that writers have the need to write, and I'm one of those people.
And people probably ask you, they ask me all the time, what would you be if you were not a comic?
Well,
I don't have an answer. That's, I mean, you're born to it. You were born to what you are. Same thing with being funny. I don't believe that it could be taught. Do you?
No, I think that there's a mindset that you have that's innate. It could be nurtured by, let's say, family or friends or whatever, but I think that there's something that's innate that looks at the world a little bit askew. We're all dented cans, okay, to a certain degree, right? Some dents are a little deeper, and some cans have a hole that goes all the way through.
Oh, yeah, we know those.
And we know all those people. But, it's interesting, Susie. Neil Simon, years ago, he wrote an article for the arts and leisure section of the Sunday
Monster. Is that what you're going to talk about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I showed it to Robin before we got engaged.
Tell the audience what it is.
Well, this was Neil Simon had written a piece for the arts and leisure section of the Sunday New York Times, and I think that it's the preface of one of his anthologies. And in it, he describes the comedy writer as a two-headed monster.
Right.
So there's one head that goes through life. You get stuck in traffic, you go to the ATM, you have a tooth pulled.
The dentist, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, without announcement or provocation, another head emerges and hovers and makes fun of the life that this head is living. And I embrace that. I embrace it.
So there's always the observer. There's always the watcher. Even though you're fully in your skin and fully, we're having lunch, you're fully present and we're talking, but there's always that other piece that's observing as the artist.
Oh, well, look, when we first got married, Robin would come home. I'd be sitting on the couch like this, and she's schlepping from Costco, 20 rolls of toilet paper in those big boxes and 40 mustards and stuff like that. And she says, "Can't you help me?" And I'm like this, I'm going, "Can't you see I'm working?" I'm sitting there with my eyes closed. And in fact, I was, look, and you take our dear friend, Larry David, many times.
Distracted.
What's that?
He gets distracted.
He gets distracted. Look, we would be in a diner. This is a million years ago, and it still goes on now. If something funny happens, if a waitress looks like Abraham Lincoln, we'll all take out our little books and we'll write it down and put it in our breast pocket. But Larry, nothing would happen, and he'll take out a book and he'll just start writing, and we'll go, "What did we miss? What we, you know what I mean?"
You know what I equate this with? I once saw an interview with Stephen Hawking's wife. I don't know which one, because the fact that he's had several is already mind-boggling to me. But uh, and somebody said to her, "Well, when he's just sitting there all the time, what is he thinking about?" And she said, "He's thinking about physics. That's where his head always was.
Yeah.
He was always thinking about physics." And I think for you, you're always, and Larry and me, we're always thinking about comedy. It's always there.
There's a wonderful shorthand like you and I have. You know, we become such close friends over the years. And when we had lunch a couple of weeks ago, not only is it fun to catch up and all of that, but you pick up where you left off, even though time has passed, only because you're on the same wavelength, if you will. You
Yeah.
know, and there's
Yeah.
something very comforting about that. You know, there's no reacquaintance necessary.
So the book is about you're working with other people. So that's the collaboration. I think that as a writer, you have to give up a certain amount of ego, especially when you're working with people who have huge egos, like Garry, like Billy, like, I mean, and I'm not using ego in a pejorative, negative way. You can't not have an ego and be a comic and a performer. You can't not, it doesn't work that way. Gilda, I'm sure also, I didn't know her. But how does that work for you? Because you also love to perform. You love to get the laughs. I've seen you.
It's it's a matter, project by project, when you're working with somebody else, and it's if 1 and 1 equals 3. I always think in a collaboration, it's the two people who are collaborating, let's say 80% alike, sensibility wise.
Yeah.
But that 20% where you're different, the alchemy makes whatever the product is something that neither one of you could have done alone. So if I'm writing with, let's say, Dave Barry, okay,
Right.
and so neither of us are performing it, it's about the work, and we bounce off of each other and put it down on paper. But and certain things can only be written by yourself. Bunny Bunny, which was about me and my relationship with Gilda, or a novel I wrote called The Other Shulman, which was an autobiographical novel. It was a personal vision. It was truly me sticking my pen into my heart and remembering and trying to access. That couldn't have been written in collaboration. But when you collaborate with somebody for that person,
Right.
Gilda, Garry, Marty Short, whoever, Steve Martin, it's and Billy, what you do is you have to know going in that at best you're vice president.
Yeah.
That you are there to service them, because you can stand on your head and say, no, you have to do this joke. If they don't feel it, it's going to be fraudulent and it's not going to work anyway. So the method that I've developed, and I'm sure that this is not, I didn't coin this by any means, is if I feel strongly about a beat, saying, listen, you've got to say something here. You need a joke at your father's funeral because it's been a little heavy for a couple of minutes. And let's say you pitch a joke and the other person doesn't like it. The next part of the conversation is, okay, this is why I said you need it. If you don't agree with the example, let's figure out what it should be if you agree that we need it. Okay, so there's a certain amount of psychology involved in it.
Absolutely.
Also.
Yeah.
What lies
manipulation in a certain way.
There's a certain amount of
that in a bad way again. It's how because when you're working with somebody, you're writing Gilda's show that she did on Broadway or whatever it is, or 700 Sundays, or any of those live shows, especially, even more so that I think than scripted television. You're there to service the other person's voice.
Absolutely. You've got to make it sound like they wrote it.
That's right.
You've got to make it sound like they lived it. you have to get inside of them so they can speak with conviction about their past. 700 Sundays, which was what I collaborated on with Billy Crystal. It was about the title. His dad worked 6 days a week. Sundays was their day to spend time together. His dad died suddenly when Billy was 15. He calculated he had roughly 700 Sundays, and I helped him put that show together. And I had not met most of those people. I didn't know his parents. I didn't know aunts and uncles, and certainly not grandparents. That was a big thrill for me because he trusted me with his family.
Uh-huh.
He trusted me, a stranger, to put words into their mouths.
Very different than writing for Gilda, for example, sketch stuff with her characters.
Absolutely.
700 Sundays, it was very autobiographical and personal.
Absolutely. So I had to make it seem like it was true to the characters he wanted to talk about.
Right.
And even if there were subtle put downs of those people because you exaggerated what they were like, I had to make sure that he can do it with love, because that's the kind of voice that he has. So there is, it's not an easy thing to do, because what you've got to do is take Alan, put him over there, and get inside of Billy, and as if writing from within him, and let him talk about it with conviction.
You said, I was just going over the book again, which I've read, and you said that about Herb Sargent. You said he wrote from within. Now, I know he was an important, you've had a lot of important mentors. He was one of the earliest and important. What did you mean by writing from within? What does that mean?
What Herb Sargent taught me, and others who considered themselves...
Explain who Herb Sargent is for people who don't know.
When we started Saturday Night Live, everybody was around 24, 25, 26. Herb Sargent was 54. He was a man who was legendary TV writer at the inception of this new medium.
Yeah.
He wrote for Steve Allen. He wrote for a lot of groundbreaking shows at the very beginning of television in the 50s. He produced a show called That Was the Week That Was in the mid-50s.
I remember that show.
And Herb did that. So he ended up being, when we started SNL, Lorne knew him. And I think Lorne may have even had been hired by Herb for some special. I don't know that to be a fact. But Herb came on. He was the grown-up. We were a bunch of hooligans.
Right.
And he was consigliere to Lorne. He was a voice of reason. And what he taught me, among many, many things, when he said write from within, I produced with him the Weekend Update segment of the show. And so you had certain jokes a million years ago to give Chevy Chase jokes about Francisco Franco is still dead and all of that. But what Herb would do is he would write a joke about climate change. And this was 1975, 76, 77. And it wasn't a big pressing issue. Mm-hmm. So he would talk about the polar caps, the rise in temperature, the melting of it. And we would put it into dress rehearsal. And it would hardly get a laugh. So I would want to pull it out because it didn't get a response.
Yeah.
And he said, no. He said, the fact that we took the time to write such a joke, even if it doesn't get a laugh, it's going to serve a purpose, because subliminally, the audience is going to go, oh, this must be a thing. Do you know what I mean? If they took the time. So that's what I meant by writing from within. He wrote for presidents. He wrote their speeches. He was, like I said, 30 years older than us, but he was as progressive and more Democrat than anybody that I knew. So it's from the heart. Garry Shandling used to say the same thing, but in a different way. Garry would say, you write from your core. Mm-hmm. When you're writing a story, it's like a Christmas tree. Get that down. That's your story. Then start hanging ornaments on it. Once you've got the plot, the voices, and you know who the people are.
So you started straight out of college working in a deli and writing jokes for
Yes.
for Borscht Belt guys, for Morty Gunty, for Freddie Roman, for all these like jokey jokes,
Yes.
right? And my contention with you has always been that like the abstract expressionists had to study the masters and learn how to draw. You learned that structure of a joke, which is something you do learn. That's not just something.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, knowing how to write a joke is different than being funny.
Oh,
Would you
oh, absolutely. Yes, because being funny, to a great look, we all have funny friends who make us laugh. It's reactive to a certain degree.
agree?
Or if you tell a story about someone, you go, "You had to be there." Just imagine her doing that or
Yes.
her saying that. Well, you've got to create that when you're the writer. All right. So writing a joke, and nobody speaks in jokes. Nobody's conversations, unless you're telling a joke, your conversations aren't set up punchline. And it was something that I learned from them. It was their cadence, which was an old-fashioned da-da, da-da,
But that's
da-da.
what we watched growing up on Ed Sullivan and all of the
Absolutely. All those guys were, it was stand-up comics on Ed Sullivan. Um, then you started getting storytellers. You got guys like Alan King, who were a
Mhm.
little bit more attitudinal,
Yeah.
okay? All right. And then as you got into the 70s, well, David Steinberg and George
David
Carlin, and
Steinberg,
yeah.
yeah.
But those older guys, they came along in the 50s and 60s. Our parents' generation went up to the Catskill Mountains and they had something new called leisure time, where they
Right.
can have a martini and sit in a nightclub and laugh at some guy in a tuxedo. And this was the promised land. And their cadence was old, almost Yiddish theater
Mhm.
kind of structure. And that was something I had to learn because I didn't speak that way. But what I used to do was I'd pick at the start of every week, I'd say, okay, what's the subject this week? Oh, buying a car. So on Monday, I'd write a monologue as if Rodney Dangerfield was buying a car. Tuesday, as if Toady Fields. Wednesday, David Steinberg. Thursday, Richard Pryor. Friday, Robert Klein. By the end of the week, I had 5 monologues in different voices. So I wanted to train the ear so I can write for different characters, which helped immensely when I got to SNL.
So you'd put yourself through school. You're an autodidact in that way. I mean,
I
you.
am an autodidact that way, yeah, because nobody taught me that drill, but it just sort of made sense to me innately that, look, if I was going to write scripts one day, I didn't want all the characters to sound alike.
Right, right.
Practice with other known voices.
That brings me to this whole idea of the change in comedy. That generation that you started writing jokes for, they didn't have a voice. They didn't have a point of view. It was jokes. It was set up, punch, but up, up, and then they started to develop the point of view, and that's what you started to do in SNL, I think.
Well,
When you
you know what happened?
yeah.
When I was writing for them, I was 21, 22, 23. They were
And what did
42.
you make a joke, Alan?
What's
What you
that?
tell everybody what you used to make a joke.
Oh, the going rate at the time was $7 a joke.
$7 a joke.
That's what you got when you started out. First joke, Morty Gunty calls up and says, "Can you give me some? They're starting a thing now called sperm banks. Can you give me a joke?" So I wrote, they have a new thing now called sperm banks, which is just like an ordinary bank, except here, after you make a deposit, you lose interest. Okay, $7, that's what broke my novice. Okay, I'm now a professional writer and working in a deli to supplement this great living. And then I graduated on the strength of my sperm bank jokes to $10 and 12. The most I ever got for one joke, I had written a joke about a Hasidic orgy, which was very unusual because the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. There was a war over that one up there. But so that was what that was like. That's what the payment was. But you see, prior to me going there, in the old days when Red Buttons and Shecky Green and Alan King and Joan Rivers and
Odie?
yes, and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis,
Yeah.
if they would score big up there, the networks and talent agents would go up there, offer them a show, and they'd go to California.
Yeah.
And they would take the writers with them. I thought that that would be the way, my entree into the business. Although by the time I got there, anyone who was going to be a star again, they'd already left. I was,
What? So you're 22 years old. You're writing jokes. You're taking trips every Saturday night up to Kutcher's. At what was in your head of what you thought you wanted to do?
what I
All right,
want
sitcoms? Did you want to write movies? Did you what were you thinking?
at the time, I just wanted to be a TV writer. I remember saying to my mom and dad when I was growing up, probably watching That Was the Week That Was, because I used to love the show, and say, my goal one day is to see my name, on, I didn't know, even though it was called The Crawl, the list of writers. Okay.
And that show
And
was very political. So were you interested in political writing?
not so much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm able to hold a conversation, but I tended more, there was a social satire more than a political satire.
Mhm.
And my thought was, when I was writing for these guys who were twice my age, I was writing for my parents' generation, and I was wondering, where the people of our generation, where were they? What was the new breeding ground? And that's when I learned about the Improv and Catch a Rising Star in New York City. And because I thought that it was our turn to talk about the world that these guys left us.
Which was very different. It was a very different world. What years are we talking about? 71, 72?
Well, I graduated college in 72. SNL started 75.
Right. So right in between there. Yeah.
So it was those 3-ish years.
Yeah.
Okay. And and I remember coming home and telling my parents, these guys are funny. They're being really nice to me and everything, but it's not my sensibility. Our generation, there was Woodstock, and there was Nixon resigning, and and all of that, Watergate, and they didn't go there. They talked about crabgrass and carpools.
Right.
Okay, and their wives wouldn't sleep with them because they just had their hair done.
And you were already post-sexual revolution, which was
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So there was a whole different set of mores. There was a different mindset. And then the best way I can say it, Susie, is that when SNL started, the logo on the wall of what was then called the RCA building, which is now, I think, the Comcast building at 30 Rock, and upstairs in 8H is the studio where SNL is done. The logo was in spray paint, Saturday Night Live. It was like graffiti on a big established monument.
Mhm.
And take from that, just make it symbolic that it was our turn to schmutz up a little bit of what Alan King was talking about, what the establishment was doing.
Right. So that was you were the right guy at the right time.
Oh God, yeah. It was really fortuitous. Lorne walked in to Catch a Rising Star because I had decided to take the jokes those old guys wouldn't buy from me and deliver them on stage. And Lorne walked in, saw me bomb, but I didn't even know who this guy was, followed me to the bar afterwards, said he liked my material, wanted to see more. And I had a meeting with him like 2 days later, and I typed up what I believe were 1,100 of my best jokes.
Which is a lot. So, okay. So, I talk about being the right person at the right time, but there's a tremendous amount of work and tenacity and talent which goes into being in the right place at the right time. And, I always feel like it's talent, tenacity, and luck, but not really luck, timing more than luck.
I think timing is the key here. Look, you're absolutely right. Tenacity will get you into the room. Okay. But your talent and what your preparation is what you're going to do when you're in the room. Okay. Right. I don't have 1,100 jokes to show Lorne. I may not have gotten that. I wouldn't have gotten that job. It's just like a shoe salesman, and he goes on the road. He's got a big suitcase filled with only one shoe of each kind. Right. This is what I do. So I do think, and I think you're 1,000% right. And it's really, we've all been through it, Susie. It's like there's an intangible talent to sort of knowing where to be, sort of knowing, looking at a room and go, gee, I'm going to sit at that table, not that table. Oh, that would be a good person for me to know. And it sounds awfully calculating, and it is to a great extent. But I do believe that, timing is right. things have to line up. But I do think that there's a certain amount of, we do our own advance work. You know what I mean? When
You're casting. We're casting our life. You met Gilda first day you were on SNL.
yeah.
That's fine, but you instinctively knew, okay, this is a person who I have a connection with, and who I'm good for her and she's good for me. So she knew you were also the right person. It was instinct. It's
Well, what it was is we made each other laugh. There was an attraction that we had. Mine was also boy girl, okay? And she put the kibosh on that within seconds. But the fact of the
You know
matter,
what? She was right, because the art was more important.
it was more important, and she ended up being Aunt Gilda to the kids. And her last appearance when she had cancer was on its Garry Shandling show. And yes, she was right. I was just a horn dog.
Like
You
you
know
were
what I mean?
22-year-old, 23-year-old guy.
Yeah, hey, look at me. You're gonna go with those hooligans? This is nice. I'll take care. But the fact of the matter is, New York was my place. I grew up on Long Island. My dad worked in New York. I used to run errands for him. I knew the city.
Yeah.
She was new to New York, and she needed somebody to not only show her around, but I can only imagine getting a little spooked by, wow, these big buildings in this place that I don't know anyone. So we leaned on each other a bit. She became a voice for what I was writing because I was attracted to that voice.
Yeah.
And she liked what I wrote. We always used to say that I brought out the guy in her and she brought out the woman in me.
I agree with that. When you were in the first season there of SNL,
Yeah.
that was 1974, were you aware that it was groundbreaking?
Well, it was 75. We went on the October 11th, 1975. Yes, I knew it was different. Lorne's only rule was, let's make each other laugh. And if we do it, we'll put it on television. His theory, and he was right, was there was a generation of kids out there, baby boomers, who were not being spoken to comedically.
Mm-hmm.
So if we made each other laugh, it became on TV. Now, I knew it was different. Now, you got to remember, put it in the context of the time, Suze. 1975, 1976, everybody had a variety show. Cal Burnett, Sonny and Cher, Rich Little, the Jacksons. It just went on and on. Flip Wilson.
Yeah.
And they all wore tuxedos and Bob Mackie gowns. And here we got Belushi in a tie-dye thing with his belly sticking out of the bottom, doing Joe Cocker and swigging beer all over the place. And even the sets, Lorne always talked about it as being the off-Broadway version of variety television. And indeed it was. Groundbreaking, we knew it was. We knew that we were hitting subject matter and saying it in a way that nobody else was. So it was fun. And it was, wow, look what we're doing. If you would have asked me then, would I know if it would be still on the air 47 years later? I would have thought you were crazy.
That's crazy.
That's insane.
Was there a kind of desire to be subversive, or was it just desire to be funny and that kind of came out of it?
Well, it was a combo platter because our way of being funny was being subversive. Okay. Yeah. Although there were times where someone would say, okay, Carol Burnett would do it this way. How are we going to do it? So we knew what the norm was, mm-hmm. and why watch us instead of that. We came at things a different direction,
and both very funny, by the way.
Carol Burnett is a genius. I mean, she's somebody for the time capsule. So that's not a qualitative judgment. It was just like, what are we going to do to give it our imprimatur? You know, and like I said, it wasn't as conscious as I just made it, but there was something internal that's gone, all right, that sounds ordinary. How are we going to approach Nixon's final days? How are we going to do that?
I think the other thing that people have to remember historically is this was network when that's all there was network. There wasn't any cable. There wasn't any, that was it. And it was live, there wasn't DVRs. There wasn't, any of that kind of stuff. So it was, I mean, I know you dealt with a lot of censorship. which I would like to discuss that because I think that we're in a period of time right now that's
There was
extreme in
it
terms of
sounds tame, and you're absolutely right because there was ABC, NBC, CBS. It wasn't even a Fox. It certainly wasn't. HBO was showing old movies, and and ESPN had 1,000 ping pong tournaments. There was nothing,
yeah.
and that was television. And Norman Lear today will tell you that if he went to sell All in the Family today, wouldn't get sold. What we did was, there was a censor that was on the show. She was this large woman, ex-nun, dress shields. You know who I'm talking about. Her name was Jane Crowley. And it took a certain amount of wit and a certain amount of cunning to get certain things on the air. A classic one that I was involved in was I was producing Weekend Update, and Michael O'Donoghue, you talk about a subversive sense of humor, he founded the National Lampoon. And so that's where he came from. And he called me up one night and he said, listen, what if Weekend Update is brought to you by a product that we make up? I said, go for it. So for that week's show, he had Don Pardo, the announcer, say, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Pussy Whip, the dessert topping for cats. Well, it killed. It did great. And I wanted to do one. So the next week at the dress rehearsal, which they have at 7:30 before the show, there's an audience, you try out the material to see what you're going to put into the actual show at 11:30. I had Don Pardo say, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Blue Balls, BLEU, Blue Balls. The cheese snack from France, okay? Worked great. Everyone wanted to put it on except one person. The door to the control room opens and out waddles 300-pound Jane Crowley. Now you understand, they're during dress rehearsal, they're sitting in the control room going line by line, page by page. This is their last chance to censor us because you go on the air live and there's no pulling it back. So she waddles out, she finds me and she says, Alan, you can't do that when you go on the air. I said, can't do what? She says, you can't say blue balls. I said, why? She says, because it has to do with the male genitalia. And I said, Jane, last week we said pussy whip, which is clearly the female genitalia. But now this week, what kind of sexist organization are you running here? She says, give me a second. She goes to the control room, picks up a phone, calls God, I guess. She comes out 10 minutes later and she comes over to me and she goes, Alan, I've given it some thought and I've come to the conclusion that because I gave you pussy whip last week, I'll be more than happy to give you blue balls this week. And I said, Jane, that's not necessary. Just let us say it on TV. We'll call it even.
That seems almost innocent now.
It's so.
It seems so. Given the so much cancel culture, wokeness, all that kind of crap, which I personally think the political correctness is bad for comedy. Really bad for comedy.
It's a chokehold. It's satire, first of all, to begin with, from the days of Jonathan Swift, always held a mirror up to society, and it reflected and influenced how we thought and how we were behaving. And we grew up at a time, and it didn't seem so long ago, that we'd all make fun of each other and then go for lunch. Okay?
Right.
The irony and the horror of this whole thing is that comedy is a unifying thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're all laughing at the same thing, enjoying it, looking at each other and nodding. This contemporary culture that we live in, it becomes divisive.
It does.
It says you're different than me and you're making fun of me and the whole thing. And you go, wait a second, that's not what I meant.
This is going really quickly. I just looked at the time. So I want to get to a couple of things.
Yeah, well, we're going to go over people's houses after this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Process. You write every day.
Yes, I do.
And
I wake up 5:30 every morning,
Uh-huh.
and I start my work day. Look, when you're writing on a show, which is a very collaborative thing, there's a built-in discipline. You shoot the show, let's say on Friday. That means you read the script on Monday, you rewrite this way, sets start being built. Okay, wardrobe gets designed, and there's an audience that's coming in. When you're by yourself and you're writing a book or you're writing a play, that if you're lucky sees the light of day 2 years from now, you've got to discipline yourself. You've got to be arbitrary at times. I have here a quote from one of my heroes, Herb Gardner, who wrote 1,000 Clowns and I'm Not Rappaport, right? I think also The Goodbye People. But when he was 26, he wrote 1,000 Clowns, or he was 28 and won a Pulitzer and everything. Okay, he talks about the writer, the comedy writer, writing alone. And he said, your days are spent making up things that no one will ever say to be, look, pardon me, let me start over. Your days are spent making up things that no one ever said to be spoken by people who do not exist for an audience that may not come.
Yes.
Okay, so there's
That's
a certain,
very disconcerting.
well, there's a embedded futility to it that you have got to overcome. You got to go, all right, when I get this down the way that I hear it, the way I see it, they'll buy it. They'll come and buy a ticket to see it. They'll go on Amazon. They'll write the book. It takes a certain amount of moxie, and it's a little bit. It could be a little bit foolhardy, also, but that's the way the days are spent.
So when you're this book is very much about all your collaborations, but as I said before, I know that there's so much that you've written that has been singular, and and there have been ups and there's been downs. There's been times when you've had great successes and times not so much. So,
Susie, do you want me to read Roger Ebert's review?
Yes, go ahead. One of my favorite things to do.
Just to set it up, I had written a book called North about a little boy who felt unappreciated by his parents, so he declared himself a free agent, went all over the world offering his services as a devoted son to the highest bidding set of parents. It was a book, and then I sent it to Rob Reiner for a blurb, and he called me up and he said, because he hosted the third SNL ever, so these relationships we're talking about have deep roots, and he said, I'm a director now. I go, oh, no shit. When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, Princess Bride. He said, I'd like to do this as a movie, which is a writer's dream. And I moved the family out to LA, get hired to adapt your own book, flew my parents out from Boca for the big night and the big premiere. And everything was wonderful until the next day, because it wasn't an internet then, when the reviews came out. And this is what Roger Ebert thought of my masterpiece. I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience insulting moment of it. Hated the sensibility that anyone would like it. Hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would actually be entertained by it. Now, on the surface, it may seem like an unfavorable review, but if you read it enough times, I think he sort of liked it. And that was the first time that I've ever written anything that I wasn't one of 10 or 15 writers on a crawl.
Right.
It wasn't something I collaborated with Garry where you can share the blame. This was like, Alan, bang. And it's just like, I'm sure there have been times you go on stage and it doesn't work as good as it does other nights.
So how did you pick yourself up from that? Because that is a brutal review.
Yeah, I'll tell you, look, if I get to the point where I can read this to you, carry it in my wallet, and I've read it on television, to get to that point took a very long time mentally, because we were living in LA where people sort of root for each other's failure a lot. Adam, our son, was being taunted at school. He came home and actually said to Dad, "Is it okay if we change our last name to Sorkin?" Okay. So, but it got to a point where Friends were very helpful. You look at their careers and you see that it's not all this.
Everybody has that,
It's
of course.
this, and then you got to get out of the self-indulgence of it all. You've got to go, okay, this is what I do, and I'm going to do it again. I'm not going to let this little man or any little man who doesn't write, who criticizes, and then. But it took a long time. It was Robin. I felt badly for her.
It was painful, I assume.
Very painful because if you look, we just said we don't know how to do anything else. We just said this is innate. So in effect, what you're doing is you're saying I can't do what I do. I am not who I say I am.
What was the next thing you wrote after that? What
Uh,
got
what
you
I
out?
wrote after that was Bunny Bunny, and that was at the behest of Robin because I let Roger Ebert and people like him. That wasn't the only bad review, mind you. And I was sitting on the couch and I was gaining weight, and she said, "You're scaring the kids. You should write something about you and Gilda." And I'll go, "Gee, I don't want to capitalize on that." She said, "To hell with that." She said, "Your best friend died. You haven't cried yet." This was 4 years later.
Yeah.
So when I wrote Bunny Bunny, which was something I had to do by myself, and it was from the heart, and it was funny and poignant, it steadied the ship. It reaffirmed me to me, and the feedback from it was tremendous.
It's terrific. It's a terrific piece, and
Yes.
it's very. It's from Yakishka's, that piece.
Well, it is from the Kishkas, and when you write from the Kishkas, the audience can smell something fraudulent a mile away. All right. So that's like even when we were talking before about writing for other people, they have to have conviction in what they're saying, as if they lived it and if they believe it. Otherwise, if there's a millisecond of non-commitment to that word or words, there's something that's not going to hit right. And with that, I didn't know that it would be a hit, but I knew that it would be something that I believed in because I lived it.
Yeah. Talk about because I think it's such an interesting story for any writer or anybody who's interested in collaboration. How your current hit Here Today came about.
This was once again a very organic.
Just to give anybody who doesn't know, Here Today is a movie that you wrote that Billy Crystal directed that is out now. Where can people see it?
I co-wrote it with Billy. He directed it. It stars Billy and Tiffany Haddish. It's in a couple of theaters, but it's streaming now. Okay,
Right.
somebody told me they saw it on Amazon. It might be on Stars, video on demand. It's starting to get an audience because it opened May 7th, right in the middle of pandemic, when I bought out a movie theater for my family in a theater that seated 70 people, but you can only buy 22 seats. And over the concession stand was a sign, Here Today, 8 o'clock, sold out. Yeah, 22 seats. Hello. But I'm really proud of this and how this started. Once again, it's a collaboration. I was a guest on the Letterman show. I told the story about how I had been the prize at a silent auction. Whoever won the silent auction got to have lunch with me. The big day comes, I drive in, I live in New Jersey, I drive into the city, I pay a toll, I park the car, I go meet this young lady, and we're having lunch. And I said, listen, I don't want to be indelicate. And I'm used to people like our friend Larry, where they'll pay $100,000 to watch him brush his teeth, right? And I say to this young lady, I say, look, I don't want to be indelicate, but how much did you pay to have this lunch? And she said 22. And I'm going, gee, that's not bad. Yeah, it's not Larry David.
You thought 2,200?
2,200. She says, no, 2,200. It's $22. I said, $22. She said, yeah, the bidding started at $20 and went up in 50-cent increments. So now I hate her, okay? And we ordered food, and she orders a seafood salad the size of my high school, and she's eating shrimps and with the clams and lobster tails. And we're talking, and all of a sudden I see that this ear is turning red, and her eye is drooping. And before you know it, her mouth is like perpendicular to the floor. She's having an allergic reaction to seafood. And I'm wondering, how long does my responsibility to this auction winner, how long does it go? Long story short, I called an ambulance. I accompanied her to Lenox Hill. She didn't have insurance. I bought her an EpiPen. So what cost her $22 cost me about 1,100. I tell this story on Letterman while Billy, who lives in California, sees it, texts me. And he says, why don't we use that as the first scene between an older guy and a younger woman? And let's see where the script goes. And it was fascinating, Susie, because he lives in, it was all emails. It was
Right.
emailing scenes. And then we wanted it to be more than just old guy, young woman. We've seen that. We picked Herb Sargent, who we mentioned before, who's got a senior position on a daily show kind of show, SNL kind of show. But my dad was starting to get the onset of dementia, as was Billy's aunt.
Hmm.
So we had this person have the onset of dementia, and we he was writing a book about his deceased wife, and he was struggling, and his goal was to get it done before he lost all of his words. So what starts off as a playful romp when meets Tiffany Haddish in the scene in the seafood restaurant and some other things, once she sees what happened, what he's going through, she becomes his support system and his muse in order for him to complete his book. So it's very funny, but there's a balance there because we treated the dementia with total respect and the total gravity that the disease deserves.
Yeah.
There were no cheap jokes about forgetting or anything like that.
How do you collaborate in that kind of way of writing?
There's a tag team thing where you may know what the arc of the first act is, and you may break it down into smaller scenes. Okay, after they go to the restaurant, he goes back to the show and the thing like that. But it's very broad strokes. And so you do it individually and send it out. If that inspires his next scene, great.
Uh-huh.
If it doesn't, he whoever the collaborator is calls up and says, listen, you left me no place to go. When I was writing a novel with Dave Barry.
Well, that was a different story.
Oh, well,
That was so crazy.
this is me being totally insane because we would
Explain that process, how you did that.
I met Dave Barry. We wanted to write together. He lives in Coral Gables, Florida. I live in Jersey. So we picked a situation where there is like an AYSO soccer game for kids. One girl kicks what would be the winning goal, but the ref says she was offside. The goal kicker's father goes berserk, and now there's a local feud between him and the guy who's the ref. Dave chose to be one character. I chose to be the other. He was the ref. I was the father of the girl. And we had no blueprint. I said, let's see if this local feud ends up that maybe there'll be a new pope. Let's see how far it escalates.
It escalated. It escalated.
It escalated beyond anything. But we didn't have any outline. And he calls me up after I send him a chapter. We're about a third of the way through the book. And he says, listen, I don't know how to tell you this. I don't know how to write my chapter. And I go, why? He says, because what you just sent me, you just killed all the characters in the book. I had him jump into the ocean off of, like a luxury liner. And I go, oh, yeah. All right, let me rewrite my chapter. So, there is a certain amount of mishaps when you don't know you. But Billy and I, in that particular case, we had a general idea where we were going, and they became little building blocks that we sent back and forth.
In something like when you work with Marty Short on his show or with Billy, are you writing the show, or are you rewriting it, or how does that work?
It's a combination. I mean, with Billy, it was a collaboration. I didn't live that life that he lived,
Yeah.
so I followed his lead and I embellished. I wrote scenes for these characters that I never met, but
Right.
it could have taken place within context. With
But Marty
Marty,
was different. That was a different kind of a show.
Marty was just a romp. It
Yeah,
was
a prompt. Yeah.
parody of a one-man show which had 7 people in it, and Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman wrote the music and the lyrics to it, and it was just a lark. And there was a book writer before me, and it wasn't working out, so they called me in, and boy, and that really became fun. We went all over the country. It got better and better and better. It opened on Broadway and it did very well. And it cemented my relationship with Marty. We only knew each other and we became very close friends in the process.
We guess what? We're almost out of time. So, Alan, what is your what? This is maybe there isn't an answer to this. Do you prefer writing by yourself? Do you prefer collaborating? Do you prefer TV, theater, film? It's also different.
It's also
You're
different.
writing children's books. It's like,
Here's where I've been really lucky, Susie, that whatever the idea is, what's the way that it wants to exist? Okay, some things are a movie, some things are only a 3-page article in the New Yorker. All right.
Right.
So I say, okay, how can I best service this idea? How does this want to go out into the world? And I aim towards that. As far as collaboration versus writing it by myself is concerned, once again, if it's first of all, if it's somebody's idea and they ask me to join, well, that's easy. There's a
right.
natural collaboration. If there's something that is that comes from my brain, but I don't know how to do it. I'm writing a movie right now with Barry Levinson, the great director. The idea is both of ours. He's supervising me. I send him pages. He calls me up, and it's something I can't do it because it's not where I live as a writer. It's more like Wag the Dog than it is Bunny Bunny. So so that's where I need him. I need his voice. So it's in terms of the what I like better. I always like working on a couple of things at the same time because invariably there's a subject that only I can write. And that's so lonely and that's so arduous. It's that Herb Gardner quote where you look for something else to say, okay, enough with that. Who do I want to play with? And so you get a balance of it because it's social.
Right, it's social. And I also think that one of the many keys to your success is that ability to be versatile. Not everybody has that versatility. Some people can only write alone, some people can only collaborate. But you, Alan,
have to collaborate. We keep on talking about it, and that's my dream,
The name of the book is Laugh Lines: My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. And the movie is out now. Everybody could say here today. Here today. And this has been so much fun.
It always is, Susie. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Alan and Susie. That was great. If any of our attendees are local, we also have Alan's book at the East Hampton Library. So come and take a look, check it out. But on behalf of the East Hampton Library, I wanted to thank you both again. It was really great. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Allison.
Thanks, Allison.
Bye, guys. Good night.
Bye.